Hello. Well, I've got a bit more energy just recently for making videos, so I thought I'd do a new music video. For quite a while, actually, I've wanted to talk about Sibelius. Now, he is a composer I admire a lot. One of I think, the most important and probably a unique composer of the 20th century, or rather the late 19th and 20th century. He's a very interesting and remarkable figure in many ways. One of them is that he, of course, is the preeminent, and in fact, he's the preeminent Finnish composer, and in fact the only Finnish composer that most people have actually heard of. He was part of the Finnish nationalist movement, which at the end of the 19th century was firstly trying to get away from Russian rule, and also to promote the Finnish language and Finnish culture, which had been rather suppressed by a very strong Swedish element in Finland. Even today, actually, in Finland, some of the population speaks Swedish and some speak Finnish. I think it's the majority speak Finnish now, but there was quite a lot of tension between these two tendencies. Interestingly enough, I didn't know until recently, Sibelius actually came originally from the Swedish-speaking side, but he took up the Finnish cause and became absolutely obsessed with the Finnish language and with Finnish culture, legends, music, and so on. And most of his music is either settings of Finnish folk tales and so on, or it's inspired by that whole world. And his music inhabits this world I find quite fascinating of Finnish, kind of general Scandinavian, but particularly Finnish mythology, pagan mythology. And along with all this, looking back to the past and national identity in music, of course, Sibelius was also an important figure in the development of the modernist movement in music in the 20th century, but what you might call the moderate modernist movement anyway, not the avant-garde of Schoenberg and the Second Viennese School. So he developed a unique language of his own. There were some influences early on from Russian composers like Tchaikovsky and so on, but he developed it into his own absolutely unique and instantly recognizable language. And the musical language influenced composers later. I mean, one example is William Walton in this country was strongly influenced by Sibelius. Quite a few other composers were. And I think, along with Stravinsky, he's probably one of the most important early 20th century composers. And so, the piece I particularly wanted to talk about today, Sibelius wrote 7 symphonies and a violin concerto, and he wrote a lot of tone poems based on Finnish legends. And the preeminent collection of Finnish legends is called the Kalevala, and it's a sort of collection of tales and things that was turned into a kind of national epic, although originally they were tales from different parts of Finland and different periods, I believe, and they were turned in the late 19th century into a Finnish national epic, which was part of this movement to promote Finnish identity and Finnish independence eventually. And he wrote 7 symphonies, and the other curious thing about Sibelius, before I get on to Kullervo, is he wrote all this music. He wrote 7 symphonies, and then he wrote a piece called Tapiola. That's his last major piece, which is an amazing work. It's an evocation of... Tapiola was the Finnish god of the forest, and it's an evocation of the great forests and lakes of Finland. I've been to Finland, and I went on a long train journey through those very forests and lakes, and you can see how they could inspire this sense of awe, really. It's a very awe-inspiring piece. It's a vast, vast forest going on for hundreds and hundreds of miles with wolves and bears in it and so on, and it's very wild. It's not like anything in the UK at all. Anyway, so he composed that, and then he stopped. He tried to start an 8th symphony, but he never finished it. And then he didn't compose anything else for about another... He lived to a ripe old age. He lived for about another 30 years, and he didn't compose anything else at all to speak of. He just decided he'd said all he had to say, and he stopped, which is very commendable, and I think some other composers could have done with doing that, actually. Not naming any names, but one well-known composer in this country died very recently, and I think could have very easily stopped 30 years ago without causing much damage. Anyway, we won't go into that. So, now I wanted to talk about not one of the 7 well-known symphonies, but an early work, a kind of symphony called Kullervo. Now, it's in 5 movements, and in some ways it's more like a suite than a symphony, but it is usually called a symphony. It's a choral symphony. It has a men's choir. That's an interesting point. It has a male voice choir. That's another big tradition. It was a tradition. It still is actually today, of male voice choirs. And they create this in Finland, and they create this very distinctive, very dark, sort of somber sound, very powerful. They have a big tradition of that singing, that kind of singing in Finland. And it's all about a character called Kullervo, which is my attempt to pronouncing Finnish. They pronounce all the consonants in Finnish, so you have to say Kullervo. There are 2 L's. Anyway, he is an interesting and remarkable and rather terrifying character from the Kalevala, from the Finnish national epic. And he is a particularly interesting figure, and the story of Kullervo is very interesting. If you're into that kind of thing, if you're into dark Scandinavian pagan stories that end in doom and death and so on, then this will be right up your street, and it is up my street, in fact. The reason I got interested originally in this piece was, funnily enough, once again, I may have mentioned before, I'm a big Tolkien fanatic, and I was very struck by what Tolkien said about this. In his youth, Tolkien was also very influenced by Finnish epics. He was interested in languages. One of the things he did when he was a student was when he won a prize, he was supposed to be studying classics, Latin and Greek, but he bought a Welsh dictionary and a Finnish dictionary, which was considered really outrageous and outlandish, because he was fascinated by these languages, and he was also fascinated by the world they evoked. And he was particularly drawn, obviously, to this story of Kullervo, and it influenced his own writings. In one of the legends that he invented in Middle-earth, it's called The Children of Hurin, or at least one version of it is, and it's about this character called Hurin, who is obviously very closely modelled on Kullervo. So anyway, the story of Kullervo is a very strange one. It's about a young man who's born into the pagan society culture of the Finnish forest sometime in the remote past, and he becomes a warrior and so on, and he's very brave and noble and great at fighting and a great hero and so on. But he's basically cursed through no particular reason, nothing that he's done. It's completely arbitrary. Everything he does in his life basically goes wrong. And it's a really terrible story. I mean, he's made a slave quite early on. He's kept as a slave for years and has to escape and fight his way out. And then he is unable to create any kind of a stable life for himself. He rebels against his mother, who looked after him when he was young and who was like a big influence. His mother dies. He's left in total grief. He has complete failure of any relationships with women. And the worst thing of all is that he ends up encountering a young woman in the forest. This is the 3rd woman that he's met in his rather tragic life, and in the end he ends up raping her, and then he discovers afterwards that she is his long lost sister, his own sister, who he lost contact with in his childhood. This is the last straw, and he goes off to war to try to fight and die heroically as a kind of penance for this crime that he's committed, and he can't even do that. So at the end he dies in a particularly horrible kind of dark way. He has a sword. This is very Tolkien-like as well. He has a sword which is a special magic sword, and it has the ability to speak on special occasions. There's this amazing scene at the end of Kullervo's life. He is in complete despair, and he asks his own sword, you know, will you take my life? Will you drink my blood, is actually what he puts it. It's all very dark and bloodthirsty. And the sword says, yes, I will drink your blood. And so he reverses the sword and falls on it and commits suicide. And the sword finishes him off. And these episodes in his life are depicted very vividly and powerfully in Sibelius's choral symphony of this name. And it ends with the death of Kullervo. So I'm going to put a link at the end of this video, a very good performance with a Finnish male voice choir singing the ending, which is very powerful. I strongly recommend you watch it all the way through, which depicts this absolutely stark and dramatic end of Kullervo. But before I do that, I think I'll just give you a little snippet from the Kalevala. It's in a rather quaint 19th century translation with these and thous, but it gives you some sense of the feeling of the rhythm of the verse in Finnish. Finnish has a very particular kind of rhythm to it. It has very short syllables, lots of short syllables coming very fast. It's not like English. It's not accented like English. For example, there's another character in the Kalevala called Lemminkainen. So it's we would say kind of Lemminkainen, but it's actually not. It's all equal. It's Lemminkainen, and every syllable and every consonant is pronounced. I can't do it very well. Anyway, but this gives you a bit of a flavour of this work. Kullervo, Kullervo's offspring, at his side the black dog taking, tracked his path through trees of forest, where the forest rose the thickest. But a short way had he wandered, but a little way walked onward, when he reached the stretch of forest, recognised the spot before him where he had seduced the maiden and his mother's child dishonoured. There the tender grass was weeping, and the lovely spot lamenting, and the young grass was deploring, and the flowers of heath were grieving for the ruin of the maiden, for the mother-child's destruction. Neither was the young grass sprouting, nor the flowers of heath expanding, nor the spot had covered over where the evil thing had happened, where he had seduced the maiden and his mother's child dishonoured. Kullervo, Kullervo's offspring, grasped the sharpened sword he carried, looked upon the sword and turned it, and he questioned it and asked it, and he asked the sword's opinion, if it was disposed to slay him, to devour his guilty body, and his evil blood to swallow. Understood the sword his meaning, understood the hero's question, and it answered him as follows. Wherefore at thy heart's desire should I not thy flesh devour, and drink up thy blood so evil? I who guilt this flesh have eaten, drank the blood of those who sinned not. Kullervo, Kullervo's offspring, with the very bluest stockings, on the ground the haft set firmly, on the heath the hilt pressed tightly, turned the point against his bosom, and upon the point he threw him. Thus he found the death he sought for, cast himself into destruction. Even so the young man perished. Thus died Kullervo, the hero. Thus the hero's life was ended. Perished thus the hapless hero. So there you are. That's the actual description at the end of Kullervo's death. So if you like that sort of thing, I mean, you might find the whole thing quite ridiculous or totally unappealing, but there's a kind of a stark power about it. It's something like something from another planet, which I find very powerful and appealing. And the way Sibelius sets it is very powerful and appealing. So I'll put the link after this, and I very much recommend that you listen to The Death of Kullervo from Sibelius's Kullervo Symphony. Thank you.